Every now and again something goes wrong, but it's a big mistake to always see the bad thing happening as a failure. Sometimes we just run out of luck, but most of the time this is our best chance to learn something new. The real distinction between engineering and not engineering is that in engineering, when bad things happen, we learn from them and we do our best to try and prevent that bad thing from ever tripping us up again. There's a lot involved in this idea. So today I want to explore what to do to create a culture that lets us accept that bad things can and will happen and that it's okay when they do. This matters because how we deal with bad things happening is probably one of the defining characteristics of great teams. Hi, and welcome to the Modern Software Engineering channel. I'm Dave Farley, and welcome. If you haven't been here before, please do hit subscribe. And if you enjoy our content on the Modern Software Engineering channel, hit like as well. We all want to do a good job, but sometimes, even when we've done a good job, things still go wrong. This is for lots of different reasons, and that is part of the problem. There are so many ways that things can go wrong that we can never predict them all. And if we can't predict them all, we can't avoid them all. More than this though, one of my favourite descriptions of science comes from physicist Richard Feynman, who once described science as a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance. This doesn't mean that we revel in ignorance, but rather that we accept that ignorance and/or misunderstanding is always possible. Maybe we missed something because we didn't know about it. Maybe we forgot something that we already did know. Or maybe we ignored it because we didn't think it was important in our circumstances. Maybe something happened that changed the situation, something that we couldn't predict. Perhaps some outrageously unlucky combination of circumstances conspired against us. Or maybe some malicious people exploited something that we had seen as safe, and that changed the game and caught us by surprise. All of these are forms of ignorance that can and will from time to time cause us problems. So certainly part of being good at something is to try and foresee at least the most likely mistakes that we're likely to face, and to try and head them off before they happen. But fundamentally, profoundly, this all depends on us knowing how things might go wrong. I can think of 3 routes to gaining that kind of knowledge. And if we do a good job, we probably need to use all 3. We can learn from experience. We can try things out and see how things go wrong for ourselves. We learn most and best from our own mistakes. We can learn from the mistakes of others. And this may be academic or practical, taught to us by somebody with more experience or at least more knowledge of the ways in which things can go wrong. Or we can learn by imagining how things might go wrong in theory and then imagine how we might avoid those imagined problems. Let me pause there and say thank you to our sponsors. We're extremely fortunate to be sponsored by Equal Experts, Transfig and Octopus. Octopus make it easy to deliver software to Kubernetes, multi-cloud, on-prem infrastructure and anywhere else. Automate the release of deployment and operations for your software and for AI workloads with tools that can handle continuous delivery at scale. All of these companies, though, offer products and services that are extremely well aligned with the topics that we discuss here every week. So if you're looking for excellence in continuous delivery and software engineering, do click on their links in the description below and check them out. And tell them that you came recommended by us. All of these ways to learn are important, and if we are wise, we should aim to use them all of the time. The last one, though, is a rather dangerous lure that tricks so many teams and organizations into some very poor habits. It's easy to fall in love with our own theories and assume that they are the truth, rather than a simulation of the truth. The result of this is that we tend to end up trusting our own ideas rather too much and assuming that they're going to work out okay. In pre-continuous delivery days, I was working on a very large point of sale system for a major UK retailer. We were about to release some significant changes one Saturday afternoon, 2 days before a public holiday. This public holiday was the biggest trading day of the year for this client and was worth tens of millions in revenue. Our changes were important to being able to cope with the anticipated demand of this major trading event in the calendar for this company. But part of these changes required that we migrate some data. One of my colleagues was working on this while I and a few others were working on some other things. Suddenly, he swore and then went very quiet indeed. He'd run a migration and it had gone wrong. He'd assumed that it was going to work and he hadn't thought through how he would cope if it didn't. So he deleted the now messed up data, only then to realise that he hadn't made a copy of it before he started the process. This was obviously a bad mistake on his part and very uncharacteristic of this normally conscientious developer. But everyone has a bad day from time to time. We all had a pretty bad time worrying about the huge consequences of this mistake. Were we going to be able to complete our release? Were we going to cost our client millions of pounds in lost revenue? Until we realised much later that there was a route to recover some data from a backup that somebody else had run a few days before. Obviously, this was a very lucky end to this story. We didn't lose millions because we broke the system. It ended up being only a few hours of extra work. They were hours that we could ill afford, but still an awful lot better than the alternative. But that was just chance, really, and not really the lesson that I'm talking about. Of course, my colleague should have made a backup before he started working on changing the data. And I'm pretty prepared to bet my own money that he never, for the rest of his career, ever made this same mistake again. But humans aren't perfect, and that wasn't the lesson either. If your solution to a problem is work harder and be smarter, that isn't an engineering solution. It's a wish, and wishes don't really scale. As humans, we are all fallible, and we'll make mistakes, and we'll miss things. Stuff will always go wrong. Sure, the developer at the centre of my story will probably be less likely to make this same mistake ever again. But what about all of the others who have not yet had that horrible sinking feeling as they realise the implications and potential costs of a bad mistake? So the real lesson, the real learning from this, represents a more profound cultural shift. In this case, this event was one of the lessons that made us start down the road of improving our version control, data migration and automation. We automated data migration and testing on test data rather than the real valuable production data. But even those things aren't really the lesson. Those are parts of the solution, but not the cultural shift that is so important. The real shift starts with recognizing, and even more than only recognizing, accepting that failure is always an option, and that if we are sensible, we should always think about how we can minimize the impact of any of those failures that may hit us. So that's what it looks like when we haven't yet built up a culture. But what does it look like when we have? At one company where I worked on a financial trading system, we had an on-premises server room, our own mini data center, if you like. We were processing billions of pounds of other people's money in our system every day. So the consequences of breaking something were rather serious. A new hire joined our operations team in a very junior role. My recollection is that he was pretty much straight out of university. This was his first, possibly second job. A couple of months later, he was tasked with doing some work in the server room, and he caused a bit of a mess. He tidied up and got a vacuum cleaner to finish up, but all the sockets had plugs in them. You can see where this is going, can't you? He removed a plug and plugged the vacuum cleaner in and immediately realised what he'd done and had that terrible sinking feeling that I was talking about before. He'd disconnected a production server. He didn't know what problems this had caused, but he immediately went to find his boss and told him about his mistake. So penalty points for disconnecting the server, but some bonus points maybe for not trying to hide his mistake. The rest of this story made me rather proud of the organisation that we had all created for several different reasons. After checking the implications of the disconnection, not too bad as it happened, were we lucky or were we good? Actually, this time it wasn't luck. We'd expected failure. We had designed our system on the assumption that things would go wrong, because they always do. It was a distributed system, so we built it on the assumption that we could never guarantee that remote services would always be available, and so our system carried on working, albeit with a slight degradation in the level of service that it provided. But the really great cultural thing that I was so proud of was that when the boss called the hapless new starter in to discuss the failure, the kid was obviously pretty terrified, nervous that he would lose his job or at least be told off. But my colleague, the head of operations, said, "I'm not going to fire you today. You've just learned a multi-million-pound lesson and we can take advantage of that. You're not going to make that mistake again, will you?" And our junior ops person agreed, starting to feel a little bit more relieved perhaps. But then his boss told him the punishment for his mistake. "We're going to make you the butt of all of our jokes for the next 2 weeks. We're going to take the piss out of you and you will take it. But after that, we're never going to mention this again." This may feel like a very English response to me. I don't know if that's true or not, but in my country, we tend to use humour a lot to ease social pressure like this. The ribbing that our trainee got was real but friendly. He was part of the joke, being held responsible without being blamed for his mistake. I was proud of this approach. This seemed to me very much the right kind of response because he had learned and recognised the seriousness of his mistake. He had acted to get more knowledgeable help to correct his mistake as soon as he had realised it, as he should. And those of us who were involved in the jokes were really reminding ourselves that there but for the grace of God go I. We knew that we could have made that mistake too. And he knew that too. This to me signalled an appropriate adult approach to dealing with a problem, while at the same time reinforcing the culture we wanted. Now, it was clear to everyone that there were consequences for making mistakes, but those consequences weren't so serious to make us want to hide or ignore them. Of course, we also did other more practical things, like label each plug so that we said what it was connected to, so that that way we could mitigate the problem more directly. But the culture was important. I think of this kind of culture of accepting failure and treating it as a learning opportunity as one of the things that differentiates great software development organisation from the others. Great teams don't make fewer mistakes, but the mistakes of great teams are recognised more quickly, fixed more quickly, and crucially, they're fixed in ways that make it impossible, or at least much less likely that the same mistake will cause problems in future. This is the engineering mindset at work. Oh, this bad thing happened. How can we stop that from ever happening again? From my perspective, it seems naively unrealistic to assume that our goal is to achieve some kind of perfection from the start. Or even worse, that failure should be rooted out and punished. Failure is how we learn new things. Failure is how we incrementally get closer and closer to the perfection that we'd all like. Certainly, we can and should work to avoid the failures that we already know about. But we should also assume that there will always be other kinds of failure that we can't predict. And we can organise our work and promote a development culture that supports us in seeking out failures as soon as we can, treating them as important when we find them, and finally, when we do find them, fixing them in ways that are durable and will help us to avoid suffering from the same failure ever again. So Feynman's satisfactory philosophy of ignorance isn't about giving up, it's about being honest that we don't know everything and never will, and building that honesty into how we work and into our culture, into the systems that we build. That, to me, is what engineering really means. Thank you very much for watching today, and if you enjoy our stuff here on the Modern Software Engineering channel, please do consider supporting our work by joining us in our Patreon community. And to our existing Patreon members, as ever, I'd like to thank you for your support. It means a lot to us. Thank you.